Really excited about this panel today. We have two folks join us. First, I'd like to introduce Kim Wald, my partner. Kim, how you doing this morning?
I am great. Thank you for having us here.
Absolutely. And Amanda Altman, one of my heroes, been to Tallahassee in the good fight with us. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
This is going to be good. And we're talking about a very serious topic, obviously, with child sex abuse. But I mean, if you can tell us a little bit about what you've been doing in this space in Kristi House, and I really want our viewers, especially those in Miami-Dade County, to understand what an incredible resource this is in our community.
So Kristi House, I'm the CEO of Kristi House, and Kristi House is Miami-Dade County's nationally accredited children's advocacy center. So we are fighting to protect children from child sexual abuse, exploitation, and other forms of childhood trauma. We work really closely with our partners in the medical field, legal field, law enforcement, and social services, obviously, to give kids everything they need. We're also working with our partners to really try to prevent abuse and exploitation before they happen. We've been providing services to this community for 31 years. And what we do is take a really coordinated approach to these cases. We have a multidisciplinary team of agencies that come together every week to address these cases and make sure no child is falling through the cracks and every child and family is getting all of the services they need to heal from the abuse and to move on.
And one thing that I find so interesting, I mean, as a former public defender and dealing with these type cases, is Kristi House acts as almost like a one-stop shop, that we're not going to keep re-traumatizing a child and have them talk to this person in the process. And I think even as a former public defender, that's the way to get to the truth, and it protects the child. Tell us about how that works with the state attorney's office and within the criminal justice system.
It's a really critical piece, Mike. So we want to be sure that the child only has to tell their story one time, outside of a therapeutic setting, of course. So the child isn't telling their story to a police officer and then an investigator from DCF and then coming to Kristi House and telling their story. They tell their story to a forensic interviewer. In Miami-Dade County, those are part of the state attorney's office. And then they have a medical team inside Kristi House who can do a medical exam, collect forensic evidence if we can get any. And then we have our mental health specialists who are also located inside Kristi House. We also have the state attorney's prosecutors. Her child sex battery unit is also located inside of Kristi House. So we're all working together to address the needs of the child in one location. It does prevent re-traumatization and re-victimization, which is a key to these kids being able to heal and move forward.
It's just a great process. So Kim, you came over here, a partner in this law firm, and decided to lead the child sex abuse and sex abuse litigation part of our firm. What drove you to, what was your passion about this area of the law and these types of victims?
So I think our passion is the survivors that we're handling, right? In every other aspect of personal injury, we call our clients victims. You call them clients. In sexual assault cases, these are survivors. And that is what drew me to this particular specialty, because the strength that these survivors have to come forward after they have had this horrendous experience that everybody across the board, plaintiffs, lawyers, defense lawyers, agree never should have happened. They then have the strength to come forward, not for themselves, but for other survivors, to make sure that truly the institutions that were not accountable, that allowed this abuse to occur, are going to be held accountable. To make sure not only in their individual case, but in the civil case, to allow for broader social justice. That's what drives me every day. That's what makes this particular type of litigation, first of all, probably extremely difficult and emotional and tiring, but the most important type of work that you can do as an injury attorney.
I just want to say, as a person who works with these survivors every day, I am so proud of you that you are using this terminology, survivor. So many people still use the word victim when we're talking about survivors, and language is so important. We do a whole education program on the importance of language. So I commend you both because that might seem like a little thing, but it's a huge thing.
And that really is it, because when these survivors come to us, again, we don't want to re-traumatize them. They've been through this horrendous experience, and knowing that they have a safe place, knowing that they are not a victim. They survived this abuse, and now what they're doing is both in the criminal but in the civil, which is so important, because on the civil side, we know the abuse that they're going to get. They're going to be called all names under the book. They're going to have to relive this experience. They're going to be called, that they're just doing this for money or things like that. So they are survivors. They're not victims, and they're doing it to make sure that anywhere that a man or a woman goes is safe for them and doesn't have these horrible things happen in the future.
And I want to ask both of you, we've been talking about, we talk about gun violence and the epidemic, and we talk about drowning, leading cause of death for children under 5 in the state of Florida. It seems like sex abuse is now everywhere in the media, finally. For terrible reasons. I mean, we obviously go to the Epstein case, but we can go through so many national headlines. I'll start with you, Amanda. What are you seeing in Dade County in terms of this epidemic, in terms of the numbers and whether there's a hope that it's going down, or are we still critical stages? Where's the overall problem as you see right now?
Well, we're definitely still in critical stages. We know the statistics. 1 in 4 girls, 1 in 13 boys will be sexually assaulted before their 18th birthday. The scarier statistic for me is that 1 in 5 children who log on to an electronic device, which is every single child, will be solicited online. That to me—
1 in 5.
1 in 5. And that statistic comes from the FBI. To me, that is terrifying. We also know that Florida ranks number 3 in the country for reported incidents of human trafficking. So we are at the epicenter of it. Miami-Dade County, number 1 in the state of Florida for reported incidents. We're at the epicenter here. And I can tell you that Kristi House, along with others, the state attorney and other service providers, are fighting all the time. Prevention education is the key. And we've got to do more of it. And I'm sure we'll talk more about it. But this is an urgent situation, and I am so glad to see that it is getting more media attention, unfortunately, like you said, for the wrong reasons, because it's happening, but it is happening in our backyard, and we have to come to accept that so we can do something about it.
The 1 in 5 number just sent chills down my spine. And so I'm looking at you, Kim, and I'm saying, okay, you can go after the offenders and you can prosecute them. You can sue the Boy Scouts or the Catholic Church or whoever some big organization is. It's not so easy to sue the creators of these phones and all the social media apps and everything like that because they're protected by Section 230. How do you, as a trial lawyer, is that the next phase? Is that the next universe that everyone's going to? Because 1 in 5, when we see these kids on those phones, just absolutely shocks me.
Absolutely. I think that is where we are going. And I know that the problem is there is that knowledge. We have that data now, finally. We have the data and we have to act upon it. So same thing with if you own an apartment complex, you have a duty. If you own a social media platform, you have to have a duty. And I know there's been congressional hearings on this of blocks and things that should be put into place. We talk about AI all the time. Why are we not putting AI to good use, right? If AI can monitor how we're, how to make a sandwich, how to build a box, why are we not using AI to monitor the social media websites, to monitor the chat bots, to make sure that these predatory behaviors are not occurring? And I think that is the next stage of litigation of, if you have these social media apps, if you have these chat rooms, what are we doing to prevent children and to protect children in these situations?
And it's not just the social media apps. We also have to be watching the gaming apps. Mm-hmm. That's a really big problem. I was talking to somebody the other day, and they were telling me that their kid was going to a gaming party. And I'm thinking, oh, cool, all these gamers are getting together, having a couple beers, whatever. No. They're having a gaming party online. So they're just putting on their headphones and they're all getting together to play games. Who's on the other end of those headphones? Do we really know? You don't really know. And these gaming apps, Roblox right now is at the forefront and not in a good way, right? They're having so many issues. So we've got to find a way to monitor that, to prevent these issues coming up from the gaming apps too. We can't forget those.
I think when you talk about that, you look at where are children, where are vulnerable people? And we know gaming, we know similar to college campuses, right? That is places that you have these vulnerable people, and that's where predators are going to strike. And Mike, I know you've handled a number of cases as well against institution and colleges in these same type of sexual assault situations.
No, when you talk about the statistics, 1 in 4. You think you go on a college campus and you think about what happens when kids leave high school and they want to have fun and everything like that. 1 in 4. I mean, back when I was in college, we even my fraternity and the fraternity system started to stop date rape night.
Yeah.
And think about how long ago that was that we were having those issues, and it doesn't seem like those things have changed in any way. Which is just incredibly scary, and obviously online with all these different deep media sites where you can take 3 steps and God knows where you are, 3 clicks of the button and everything along those lines. I want to ask since I have both of y'all here, the criminal and the civil justice system. When you have a case, Amanda, a terrible child sex abuse case and it's being prosecuted, and Kim is representing the survivor. How do you view that? How do you guys work together with a civil justice attorney like Kim or our firm? And then Kim, maybe talk about how you work with the state attorney's office.
So listen, we're always happy to work with our attorneys who are, whether it's a prosecuting attorney or it's a civil attorney who's going after it. Obviously, when it's a prosecution, we have an agreement with the state attorney's office. So we share a lot of information with them. It's a little bit different in civil cases. We don't have that same sharing of information. But of course, with proper subpoenas or records requests or whatever, we're always happy to give information. I am very careful when we get subpoenas and other records requests, though, to be sure that we know who's asking for them, to make sure that it is the lawyer who's actually representing the survivor, because you never know. And so we're really careful at Kristi House about who we're working with and what we're telling people. And obviously we have a lot of HIPAA issues that we have to be very mindful of. But of course, we are always proponents of working with the people who are either prosecuting these cases or who are seeking civil penalties on behalf of these survivors. It's just so important. And before we just keep talking about this, Mike, though, there's one thing I want to bring up, and Kim knows I always go to this issue. It's men, because we're always talking about sexual assault and trafficking and these issues in the context of women being survivors, and we can't leave out the men. The statistic isn't quite as high. It's the 1 in 13. We don't know the statistics when it comes to human trafficking. The most up-to-date research paper suggests that at a minimum, 33% of survivors of human trafficking are males. And, there's a lot of reasons that we don't have good data, that the reporting isn't as good there. But I want to always be sure that we're talking about the men as well.
Absolutely. Kim?
So I think one of the biggest misconceptions when a survivor comes to us is that the civil case is going to hurt their criminal case, right? And that is the complete opposite. If anything, the civil attorney can help the criminal case along. There should never be a situation where you have a survivor, they want to seek justice, but they don't because of that fear. In fact, with the statute of limitations, you really have to come forward as soon as possible to your attorney to make sure you can have a claim. But we do everything we can to assist the state attorney's office. We're in a unique position because we have attorney-client privilege with our client when the state attorney doesn't. And so during their prep meetings, anything that's said during that prep meeting can come out in a deposition. But when you have a civil attorney, that is attorney-client privilege. So we can have very extensive meetings with our clients. We can make sure that they have all of the data, that they've looked at their reports, that there aren't going to be any inconsistencies, and that they really have that support along the way. Even just being that shoulder to cry upon.
It's such a great points that you're making. Also, we have to remember, and I obviously love our state attorney's office and we work so closely with them, but they're government. And so many people are weary of government, not just today in our current political climate, but always. And so a civil attorney who does have attorney-client privilege can have a totally different comfort level. The survivor can have a totally different comfort level with that attorney. And we've had cases where, the state attorney's office hasn't had enough information to really be able to prosecute the case. And then a civil attorney has come in and said, well, wait a minute, I've got some additional information for you from my client. That can make that relationship that you're able to have with your client that perhaps this assistant state attorney cannot have for various reasons can make all the difference.
That's funny you say that. We're sitting in a conference room in our office, and we had a case one time, a civil case, where two people were killed at the Opalakan Highway, a flea market. There was no arrest. And the homicide detective called me and said, can I go through your file? Can I just go through everything you have in your file? I said, absolutely. And in there, they found a couple witnesses that we had interviewed, and they went and got a DNA sample from one of them and made 2 arrests. Wow. And only because it came to our file. And I always thought the homicide detective, to think of that was incredibly just outside the box, and it was great. I want to move to something that you guys have touched on that is not understood. We've got FIFA coming up, all these different things, and I want to talk about human trafficking. Talk about government. I think the job that the federal government, the state governments, local police departments with these task forces have been great. They've made arrests of all these different traffickers, but human trafficking humans are the second most trafficked things in the world, right behind drugs. And unless you eliminate the need for that and supply and demand, I've always said if you arrest Pablo Escobar, there's going to be another drug lord.
Right.
Because the demand is still there. So we need to arrest traffickers. We need to do what we do. But where people are trafficked and where these crimes happen have to be responsible. So, Kim, maybe I'll start with you. You've handled several human trafficking cases. What's different about them, and who do you think needs to be responsible, and where is that litigation going as you see it?
Yeah, so Mike, as you know, we have a number of active human trafficking cases we're working on now. We see them a lot at hotels and motels. We see them at airports. We see them at all of these type of institutions that have or are supposed to have policies and procedures in place, but they're simply not following them. And it is so important to not only hold the trafficker responsible, but you have to hold the institution because they see what is going on and they see it with their own eyes and they're simply allowing it and providing the opportunity. Our security experts always talk about the crime triangle, which is the victim, the location, and the opportunity. If you remove one leg of that triangle, the crime will go away. So if you remove these places that these traffickers can actually go to, human trafficking will go away, but we have to focus on that, and we have to make sure that we are litigating these cases. When you talk about what the future is, human trafficking cases are probably the most difficult cases that we have handled. And we've handled some pretty tough cases. These are particularly difficult for many reasons. One is that a lot of these witnesses do not want to talk, right? Because they don't want to get in trouble. They might have had something along the way. They might have received a tip or they might have received some type of incentive. The clients in these cases as well, these survivors, this is a particularly susceptible group, even more than your sex abuse survivors. Human trafficking survivors, they were targeted for a reason, whether for their age, whether for their socioeconomic status, whether for they were new to the area and didn't know anybody. And they're taken in and there's this brainwashing that occurs that they go back to traffickers. And Mike, I know we've had many cases where we have a client and the client may go back to the trafficker in the middle of our case. And so that's why these particularly are the hardest type of cases, but on the flip side, the most important that we can handle.
Yeah. How do you guys handle these difficult, and you feel so bad, like Kim said, what do the traffickers do? They have them become dependent on money, dependent on threats, dependent on drugs. So how does Kristi House deal with these difficult situations?
Yeah, this The human trafficking survivors is by far the most difficult and complex population that we work with at Kristi House. And back in 2014, we started a very specialized comprehensive program for survivors of human trafficking. And, in Kristi House, our kids are under the age of 18. But for our human trafficking program, which is called Project Gold, it is, we serve kids, young adults up to the age of 26 because we know they need long-term care and help. And by the way, the average age of entering human trafficking, 11 to 13. 11 to 13. Scary, scary. So we take a comprehensive approach. We have what's called a drop-in center. It's in an undisclosed location. Kids come there all day long. They get individual therapy, group life skills courses. Some of these kids don't know anything about Social Security numbers, checking accounts, basic things that we take for granted that we learned as kids. They don't know anything about those kinds of things. We've been doing that since 2014. And in around 2018-19, we started realizing that you can give these kids therapy and things like that, but if they don't see a path forward, they do go back into the life of trafficking. And so we had to come up with ways to really make them independent and self-sufficient. So we started an education and jobs program as well. So we have a full-time tutor on staff. We have education specialists who help these kids if they want to get their GED, if they need to finish high school, if they want to go on to college or a technical or trade school. They help them with all of those things. I mean, they even go into the schools. They'll meet with the teachers. They'll meet with the counselors, whatever they need to do. And then we have a success coach who's really helping them, whether it's getting their first job or it's putting them on a career path, so that they can see that they can become independent, productive members of society. You have to remember, too, that a lot of these kids have kids, unfortunately. And so we have to also teach them how to be parents. So there's a lot that goes into it. And these kids can be with us for a long time. It's, they've suffered layers and layers of complex trauma, Mike. And it's really challenging.
Well, you guys are an absolute gem to this community. I mean, the power of the trafficker is you never know how to have a checking account. You never know how to do any of this because then what's your only option?
You rely on the trafficker.
To go back. And Kim, I know this would take us another hour, but to me, the scariest location that you would go to if you're a trafficker is not a place with guardianship, like a hotel or a truck stop that still has some guardianship, but it's a short-term rental. Where as a trafficker, you now are in total control of the property and there's no eyes on you. And so I know you're seeing that in your practice. We could take an hour on it, but if you could tell our viewers a little bit about short-term rentals and their responsibility to prevent human trafficking.
So I think the problem is that there's not a responsibility right now, that short-term rentals are effectively operating hotels and motels, have more beds than hotels and motels. Short-term rentals now have more beds than Marriott and Hilton and all of those major, Hyatt, all those major brands combined, but they do not have the same protections. They don't have to follow the same human trafficking requirements. They don't have to have the check-in person who is keeping eyes on somebody. They don't have to have cameras. They don't have to have locks. Any of the things that are so critical that we've learned from experience. So again, we have the data. We've seen this for years. Miami is the number one spot in Florida. Florida is the number 3 state. So why are we not doing this? We know Florida, too, is the hotbed for short-term rentals. We have Disney World. We have the port. We have Miami. We have we have pools, great weather all year round. So people come down to us for short-term rentals, and these are the spots that traffickers know. Short-term rentals, if you have one on your block, everybody knows, oh, that's the Airbnb house. A new person coming every week with suitcases at all hours of the day and night, traveling by themselves, standing outside the house on the phone saying, how do I get in again? What's the code? If you just observe that as a neighbor, anybody can talk and you know where to target. Again, if you have those targets and you're not doing anything about it, this is a huge problem and they're not regulated. And I know we're up in Tallahassee every year trying to get these regulated, but right now, unfortunately, there's simply no regulation.
So I'm going to return to technology, unfortunately. And, it's amazing to me sometimes with all that's going on, obviously with the social media litigation, addiction, with AI and these chat bots participating in helping kids commit suicide. with mass shootings and everything like that. Amanda, I'm going to start with you. You're talking to some parents at a luncheon or a cocktail party, and the parents said, well, I mean, I would never let my kid have unauthorized access on the phone, yet when we go to any restaurant in America, there's kids on the phone. What would be your serious advice to parents about what they have to watch out for with their kids and predators as it relates to sex abuse and human trafficking on these devices?
First of all, you have to use whatever parental controls are available. And I know that they're not foolproof and many of our kids know how to get around them. But as a very basic starter, you've got to use whatever parental controls you can use. Also, with things like text messaging, there's a way that parents can see the text messages on their own phones. So you want to be sure that you're setting that up so you can see what's going on. I say no phones, no tablets, no computers outside of a common area of the house, because if I can't see what you're doing, I don't know what you're doing. And if your kids are gaming, I mean, come on, it's not realistic to tell our kids you can't game. So, but sometimes get on the games with your kids. My stepson used to game all the time, and sometimes I would say, give me a pair of headphones, let's play together, and let me hear who you're talking to on the other side. Social media, you've got to have access to your kids' accounts if they're on social media. It's not an invasion of your child's privacy. And I hear that one a lot. Well, I don't want to invade my child's privacy. I want to respect their privacy. No, I'm sorry. You need to pay attention. You need to know. And I always feel bad having these conversations with parents because most parents are so busy these days. There's so much going on. Most of our households are 2-income households. So both parents are working outside of the house. There's so much that parents have to be responsible for, but you have just got to pay such close attention to what your kids are doing online. And if your kids are really social people and they're out with their group of friends and hanging out, and all of a sudden you notice they're not doing that anymore, or they have a different group of friends, or all they're doing now is sitting at home and gaming, you really need to start asking some questions. That's the other thing. Just in general, we have to have open lines of communications with our kids. Your kids have to feel safe coming to you and talking to you. We see all of these cases of sextortion and online bullying, and that's where sometimes the suicides come in. And it's just like the kids were too embarrassed to talk to their parents about it. And if it isn't going to be the parent, they have to have some adult in their life who they trust enough to go to with these issues. So I could go on and on forever because there's so many things, but just really you have got to be so vigilant with what your kids are doing, especially online.
When you talk about technology too, I think the other area we haven't discussed is Uber and Lyft,
yes.
right? The technology of just getting into someone's car. What were we all told as kids? The 2 rules is don't answer the door to anybody and don't get into a stranger's car. What do we do every day with our kids? Send them in an Uber by themselves. What do we do when we had too many drinks at night and you don't want to drive because you're being responsible? You call that Uber and Lyft. And so, of course, you should never drink and drive, but you need to be responsible when you're in those situations. You need to be awake and alert. You need to send your friend, your husband, your mother, father, the application of where you're actually going. And so that technology is really interesting because it's a great service, but it's also a great opportunity for these horrible opportunities.
Yeah, you and I just talked about this in another panel that we were on, and you've got to be sure you're sharing your location with somebody. Like there's a way on the Uber app, at least, you can share where you are, share your ride with somebody. You've got to always be sure that you're doing that whenever you're taking those rideshare services.
Well, I could talk to you guys for days, not hours, but days about all these things. And I want to thank you, number one, for being here. But more importantly, I think what the work that both of you are doing is saving people's lives and saving kids. So keep doing it. And thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
A Brand Story Communications podcast production.